Cool. And we are live. As I mentioned, welcome to the August edition of Baltimore SharePoint Users Group. And I'm Shadidi Laser, and let's get into the introductions and announcements for this month before we get into our featured presentation. So, bring this full screen. Okay, so for those who are tuning into the live stream, and I'd like to thank our streaming partners and various groups who have stepped forward to help us spread our footprint virtually during these times and allow us to stream our meetings to their communities or groups. Thank you very much for that privilege. So, what is Baltimore SharePoint Users Group? Well, since 2007, it has been a community-focused learning institution, which is set up, designed to help people with professional development, with resources, and ultimately, if a member of Baltimore SharePoint can come to our meetings and let's say on the Friday or Monday meeting, have one resource, tip, or tool to a challenge, a scenario that the organization is facing, we're doing our job. If a member happens to be laid off during these times and they can have a conversation with someone within the group and get back to work and put food on the table, then we are doing our job. And ultimately, what we've always come to believe is that, listen, you're traveling from somewhere, especially when we're meeting in person. So whether you're coming from the job or the contract or you were doing job searches all day, we value your contributions. So always try to make sure you're connected to other professionals. And during these times, it's been very interesting to see how that connection has played out in terms of helping people find jobs. There's a few people who were stranded in other countries and help them find work in other countries, and you name it. And there's tons of resources here. Our featured speaker, Scott Brewster, can probably get you hired in about 40 different places, and so on and so forth. So when we talk about BSPUG and what it is, longest running Microsoft focused community institution in the great state of Maryland. And so over 1,600 Microsoft professionals trained and certified. I actually sat down and did a count on this. So, and the number now is 5 Microsoft practices that were started from our group and not even including mine. So the story of Baltimore SharePoint is something that I'm proud of, and it's always great to see the talent that has come through the group and the meetings. And I often look at it as like Saturday Night Live, where people go on to do great and wonderful things, but it continues to be an engine for those who are just starting and those who want to stay connected. So special thanks to ProObject. Now, in, let's say, non-pandemic times, they are our location sponsor. So we meet at ProObject, and that is 7467 Ridge Road, Hanover, Maryland, right around the corner from the casino, Maryland Live. And so during this time, they've been very supportive, sharing our meetings, attending our meetings. And I want to especially thank Ted Staley. This is Ted's email here. And so this month, there is a opportunity for a front-end software engineer. And so the description goes, you need a TS SCI with Polygraph. And the beautiful thing about this is that ProObject may be available to sponsor your clearance based on a scenario. So definitely reach out if your, let's say, your clearance may have lapsed or so on and so forth, and you need sponsorship. ProObject is willing to sponsor. What they're looking for on a day-to-day basis from a skill set perspective is extensive knowledge of SharePoint Designer, working with SharePoint workflows. And let's say, so this is going to be more or less a legacy project, and strong JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. So once again, front-end software engineer, and send your resume if this applies to you. So if you have the front-end development skills, and let's say you're strong with SharePoint workflows, and you have the clearance, then, or you believe you can be sponsored, then please send your resume to tmstaley@proobject.com. Moving on. Okay, so in terms of community events, spsevents.org is a go-to location. Many of the events within SharePoint Saturday or Microsoft 365 Saturday have basically come to a halt. Not many organizations or groups around the world are doing virtual events. There were a few in Philadelphia and other places, but M365 Cabo San Lucas is going to be in November, and you can go to spsevents.org in order to register for this event. And so from the community, if you know of any events that are coming up, please type in the chat what events are coming up. Make sure to include the dates for it. So the title and the date, make sure to include that in the chat so that when I update, let's say the description on social media, especially, it is included within that so that people gain access to resources. Okay, so the BSPUG golden rule, as I mentioned, as a member, you are coming here from somewhere. And so if you're going to be coming to a group that typically meets after work, after hours, I believe that that is, let's say, a quality of someone who's going on to do great things. You have the above and beyond mentality, the go-getters mentality, and that should be rewarded. And so user groups in themselves, whether it's, a Power Platform group or Power Automate or, SharePoint users groups all around the country, they tend to be hubs for jobs, so on and so forth. Now, we at Baltimore SharePoint, we don't necessarily allow for recruiters to plaster jobs before, during, and after events, because we want to focus more on learning and networking, relationship building. But that does not mean that there are not jobs available and that there are not recruiters interested. So if you are uncertain, if you're in between contracts, if things are shaky at your current contract or full-time employment, then please email me. And what we do is we provide free career and resume review sessions and that has been extended throughout September 30th. But the secret is that it's going to keep extending throughout the pandemic. So there's no reason why things happen within a career, but you don't necessarily have to suffer in silence. So let me check the chat. So SP Fest DC, September 22nd through 24th, 2021. That is SP Fest DC, September 22nd through 24th. Top-notch conference. I was a speaker there before. Great event. And thank you, Nancy, for sharing the details. SP Fest DC coming up next month. Okay, so and final thought before we get into the session for tonight. So if you have been laid off, and most companies that start, whether large or small, typically start from a layoff of some sort or being fired. There's some great success stories of that. So if you fall into that category, you have years of experience and you want to get into consulting and build a company that works with your particular values, there's a number of reasons to start a business. But the point is that you have access to SCORE Greater Baltimore. And so there's a total of 6 locations, and the SCORE is currently providing 100% virtual support. So you can meet on the phone, on a video chat session through Teams or otherwise, or through email. And so this is helpful for your business plan or any details that you need in order to start a business, which also includes mentorship. So the website is score.greaterbaltimore or greaterbaltimore.score.org, greaterbaltimore.score.org, and take advantage of that. Now, unless you want to hear my wonderful voice every month, which I have no problem doing, speakers provide variety to our meetings and allows us the power of perspective to learn different things each and every month. We have various sessions such as break fix, lessons learned, so on and so forth, ranging from 10-minute sessions to, let's say, 45-minute sessions for our virtual events. In person tend to go a bit longer because we're in person. And so if you want to challenge yourself by being a speaker or share what you know with the community, then please send me an email directly. And that is hello@mrshadi.com. So definitely take advantage of that. So month of October, we have company coming in to discuss disaster recovery and backups for Microsoft 365. They're excited to deliver their session. And we're looking at a community presentation from a first-time speaker, great developer, but has never delivered a user group presentation. His mentor, who is a dear friend of mine, has put him on the hot seat. And so we will see how it all comes together. But first thing I want you to realize is that with a presentation, I will sit down and review your slides. I will tell you what to add, include, take away, so that you put your best foot forward and give yourself a chance to deliver a great presentation. In most cases, you will catch the speaker bug, which means you fall in love with speaking, and the rest is history. And so with that being said, let's move on to our featured presentation. So who I'm bringing to the stage is a long time friend of the program, member of the BSPUG, has gone on to lead communities around the Beltway, most notably SharePoint Users Group of DC. as well as user groups within companies as well. This gentleman is an avid speaker at various conferences and communities. He's not just a SharePoint professional, ladies and gentlemen. This guy's an SP superhero. So without further ado, I know you would like that one, Scott. Without further ado, I bring to you the Scott Brewster.
Thank you, Shadid. I think I need some theme music, like my intro to the wrestling ring or something. I appreciate that. I have no slides for tonight, but I'm going to give you a list that you can follow later, and I'm going to go through exactly demo what you're going to do to work with SharePoint, setting up your permission architecture. So what I have in front of you here is my solution planning workbook. I first had some kind of design for this back in about 2009, after I'd already been working in SharePoint for a minute. And I like to plan things before I build them. I know that you'll probably find a lot of SharePoint sites where that was obviously not the case. So I just like to document what I'm doing. It's great to have the documentation for.
Sorry to interrupt you. This is Missy. We can't see your workbook.
Oh, duh.
Sorry.
So sorry. Glad you said something.
Yeah, share screen is at the bottom.
Yep, I got it.
Perfect.
I turned on my camera. I didn't turn on the screen. Sorry. And if you're wondering, yes, my desktop looks odd because I run Linux. So let me zoom in a little bit on this workbook so that's also easier for you to see. Are we good now?
Yes, good to go.
Yay. Okay. Sorry about that. So I like to plan everything out, and this is just how I started. So this workbook has things for other stuff that we can touch on. I think I've got a link to it on my blog somewhere, SharePointSuperheroes.com, and I'll send you a link to some of that stuff later. What we've got, let me just show you by default. Okay. If I have a team site and I look for membership, I'm the only person, I'm an owner. The classic UI and modern UI looks a little bit different on how you're going to manage your permissions. If I click on site permissions now in modern, this is what comes up, and you're going to see the different groups. And you still want to go to advanced permissions, because if you had anything else in here other than those default groups, you would not know until you hit the advanced. So please do that. And now we're back into how you would manage it in classic UI. So these are the different groups that we have from the get. When a new site is brand new, a new site collection is brand new, it's going to have something like that. So I'm going to come back in here and now, the team names that you start with, or these group names that you start with, I don't like them. Microsoft has a long history of bad naming of things, which is why they rename all of their products every 3 to 7 years. So I like to rename some of these myself. So that is one item that you should write down that, yes, feel free to rename all of your permission groups so that they make more sense. Number one, I would rename this group to be site administration or site administrators, so that the role that these people have is very clear. We use role-based access control. If you've done any of the base layer security certifications out there, you're going to hear about role-based access control. Out of the box, what you pretty much get with any site isn't exactly role-based. It's more of an organizationally based, because most sites that you're going to create in your SharePoint career are going to be for organizations, not necessarily for a particular function. At least with the clients that I've had, that tends to be the case. So how do we define what was a site owner so that it is different from the boss of the office? Because the boss of the office should not necessarily have full control. I know that might sound like sacrilege to those people who are supporting the boss, but let me illustrate. The last time the boss, the GS15 in charge of your branch or division, really showed off his technical acumen was whenever he got his first beta VCR. Okay, because they're older, they tend to have fewer technical skills. Now, it's not to say that there aren't obviously a lot of exceptions to that, but more often than not, they are in a role of being the boss. Therefore, they should not be in the role of managing the information architecture, including the permission architecture of your site. They are not going to be the ones who create the libraries. They're not going to be the ones who create the content types, because some of that stuff is just too technical for their role. They've got more important things to be doing with their time. They should not be the ones in that role. Is it absolutely horrible and a sin if you put them in there? No, but exposes them to potential problems if they take it upon themselves to make changes and they don't know what they're doing. So just as you could add anyone else to having full control, it's just not wise when the people aren't trained to do it. The same reason why we void warranties for whenever the person who owns the device tries to open it. You don't necessarily let the people who own the data run the mechanics, right? They are the drivers and we are the mechanics. So where would we put the leadership? Just so that they get a warm and fuzzy, I call them leadership and not management. And so I create that group right there. So the organization, you can keep that, the members group right there, and this other group for the visitors. We tend to think of that visitors group as everyone outside of my office. But if you are in an environment where you can allow external access, then you might want to define additional groups to say, look, these folks are within company ABC, and these are visitors from outside of company ABC, and you can work with that. We don't allow external visitors in any of my clients, so I'm not going to worry about that one for now. So I'm going to take this group name here, and I'm going to say it owns these other groups. To illustrate why, if I go into that owner's group and I go into its settings, I need to go ahead and change the name. So administrators, right? This will automatically update. It should always be another group. It should never be a human. If it is a human, you're going to run in a single point of failure problem. Okay, so who can have view membership of the group? Unless you are working for the Freemasons, it should be everyone. The reason for this, in previous versions of SharePoint, it would have been group members by default. And that's because at one point, SharePoint sites used to have internet-facing capabilities. Ferrari.com, HawaiianAirlines.com, famous for being SharePoint sites that were modified beautifully out of the box. So at one point, you had anonymous access so that everyone on the internet would be able to hit the page. What they found was, by understanding how the URLs are structured, they could find out who the administrators were and start spear phishing campaigns. So we deny that ability, and that makes it so they would have less access to do something malicious and start that phishing stuff. Since we don't have internet facing anymore, you definitely want to have everyone. But the main reason why you want to have everyone here is in case you have any kind of automation. SharePoint Designer workflows and some of your Power Automate workflows, if they are to send emails to, say, the leadership or to the site administrators, will not function if that group that you are in can't see the membership of that group, because it knows that I need to send an email to this group, but I can't read the emails, so I'm not going to send an email, right? So it's highly important that you say view membership is everyone. Who can edit the membership of the group? That's more up in the air as to what you might want. I'd say for fast-moving projects where you're very small groups, but you are bringing in people and then for just their period that they're supporting something and then removing them, you might want to have group members being able to do that. Otherwise, we tend to have much more structured environments, and so I would say group owner for those. Membership requests, I would say no. I know my content. I know what roles people should be in, and that means I know that the only time I should be adding and removing people from these different groups is when they join or leave my organization, my company, because by virtue of their job and the role that they are in provides a level of access they should receive. So I don't want to have membership requests. That's just a personal thing. It gets kind of annoying whenever it's turned on, and then you constantly find that someone's asking for access, and it's really just they don't understand that they want to create a page for which they might have access, but they're trying to create a site for which they do not have access, and they don't know the difference between a page and a site. So that tends to be how I get most of that stuff. So I'm going to hit OK. And as you can see now, the owner changed as well to match. So I'm going to create like that and more. I have that demo site members. Oh, because I made that as a team site, so it's got the email address and everything. The visitors, site administrators, and I want to say leadership. So again, you don't want the group owner to have or to be anybody but another group. So we have the site administrators. It's going to automatically detect, render. Okay. What level of access should this group have? Well, for now, I'm going to say nothing. You can have groups exist without permissions, and you can do different things with those, such as scoping, people pickers, and other things when it comes to like workflow. So you're going to have groups that exist without any kind of permissions, but I want to go through assigning those permissions. So we're going to leave that off. So for instance, it's going to look like this. I will remove myself from this group and add. So my wife is the boss, but she has 0 technical skills. So she's in leadership, and that works for our purposes today. So back to square one. This is what our permissions look for now. I go back to the workbook. So again, who can view the membership? We wanted everyone. Who can edit the membership? We're saying no. Now, the reason why I'm documenting this, even though I already figured out what I wanted and I made those changes, is one day you might move on to green pastures. You might find another job. You need to leave documentation for the people who come in behind you so that they know if someone breaks something, what it's supposed to be. Because you could have very complex permissions. I would not recommend extremely complex permissions on each site collection, but you could. And you're going to have permission breaks regardless. So it's very important that you document what it should look like in case something ever breaks. And this is where we get to this. So by default, so that's easier. Okay, so by default, we're going to have different objects that pop up. You should go through your site contents and just kind of lay it all out there as far as what different lists and libraries and everything else I have. You're going to lay that out in the workbook. Anytime you go to create a new list or library, add it to the workbook and plan it out before you build. Okay, that's my SharePoint stuff. But for now, I normally just keep that there because I tend to end up with larger workbooks that have 50 different workbooks inside of them or worksheets inside of them. So I just keep that there. The drop-off library, you can never delete. So do yourself a favor and never turn the feature on unless you know how to use it. So let's go through that right now. Now, part of the reason why we have these different worksheets is because I can have it reference the other worksheets to pull over the different groups. So I like that. Okay. And by default, we've got in my workbook these different options. If you scroll down to, I think it's line 200 or something, you see the different options that we've got. But by default, your permission levels that you have so our different permission levels out of the box: full control, design, edit, contribute, and read. Whenever you turn on certain features, if you had publishing turned on, which you're not going to really do in modern, if you record center, it's going to create a couple of different things, but you can add your own. For the purposes of this demo, I will add contribute, no delete. It tends to be one that is needed pretty often. I would suggest some kind of description. So you're going to come through here and we're going to say, I want people to add items. I want people to be able to edit items. I want them to be able to open items, view version history, create alerts, view application pages. That's very important. On the sites themselves, I don't want them to be able to do themes. I don't want them to be able to add different things. I want them to be able to create groups, browse directory, use self-service site creation, enumerate permissions. Should they be able to see permissions? Probably not. Edit personal user information. So going up in here and making some changes depending upon your tenant. This may or may not have any bearing because at the tenant level, they could restrict that down and manage everything through Active Directory. But these are important whenever you're talking about the different levels that you give people, and that is managing personal views and adding and removing their own web parts. I don't know of anyone who normally does that on a page for personal reasons, right? So it's not visible to anybody else. But managing personal views can be important because I might not want every column of data to be visible to all of my end users. It might not be harmful because this is not a security setting by any means, but I want to just give them a very rigid, structured experience where they don't mess things up for themselves. So I tend to leave that off for like my visitors who come in. For the members, I don't necessarily mind so much, but I'm going to do this because on the list where I might have them do contribute, no delete, this is what I would like. Examples for something like this would be like a work order request application. You're going to break the inheritance, and then you're going to give people who would otherwise have read, give them contribute, no delete, so that on that one particular list, they can add new content. They can't delete any content. And, they might be able to do some editing, but definitely include your description for that. So back to here. So that's where I got these different permission levels. We're going to go through here and think out loud with me if you'd like. In a documents library, we can go into that conversation a whole nother time. I hate the word documents for documents library. It is screaming junk drawer. So I highly suggest that you create additional libraries that match the types of content that kind of group together naturally, like accounting information goes in one, project documents, another, office picnic flyer goes in another. So give them good names and create them. But out of the box, this is what we've got. If it's a fast-moving project, maybe you leave the documents in there. You're definitely going to have access to the documents library, because if you ever create a Microsoft team, you're going to have that documents library exist on the SharePoint site that resides behind it. And that's where all files are going to be placed that get dropped into a conversation. And every channel that you have gets its own folder. If you then go into that documents library and you try to create additional folders, or you try to change the name of things from that SharePoint library, you will break it. And it will be ugly. You have to delete your channels and recreate things from scratch. So I highly suggest you don't do that. And definitely on those folders inside of that documents library, do not attempt to change their permissions, because that too will break it. But our site administrators, they should have full control on virtually everything that ever gets created. Okay? My leadership should, at a minimum, have read, because they are the data owners, essentially. So I would go ahead and grant them read on everything, unless it was something that I was completely disabling. I would do it then. So oftentimes you might see documents and shared documents, which is crazy, or you might find site collection documents. And so whenever you see that, you might want to just say, hey, I'm going to leave this here, full control, and I'm going to just remove everyone else from having any access to it, because that's just kind of weird. And I personally do not delete anything that was created by SharePoint, because bad things tend to happen. So you might not use it. If you know that no one's going to use it, just remove everyone from having permissions to it, but don't delete it. Bad things happen. So site members, I want them, let me show you some here. We have edit now, okay? Up until, what was it, SharePoint 2013, there was no edit, okay? It was contribute. And by default, since 2013, edit happens to be the permission level. That edit adds the ability for people to create additional columns on the lists. If you care about your information architecture and you care about, you know, like you might have nice, pretty names for all your titles, right? For all those fields that you end up creating, all those columns that you create, and then you get someone who types in all caps, right? Like you just want to hit somebody because they did that to your stuff. Highly suggest that you don't give them edit. Okay? Go ahead and change everything back to contribute, because, you know, dumb people happen. So I'm going to say that for that one, and for the pages, maybe, for the site assets, I'm going to say, let's go ahead. So, site pages, announcements. Let's choose that too. So this is how I've laid this one out, and that is, I want them to be able to add and remove documents for this purpose, for the demo. On the images, however, maybe I don't want them to be able to just keep uploading things, because I might have a personal branding standard of using certain things, and maybe I don't want them to. Maybe you create a different images library specific to what they might be allowed to do if they were creating pages. You know, we can do that. The pages library. So whenever you go to create new, right? You want them to be able to create a page, maybe. It really depends on how tight you keep the branding and your messaging from your sites. So maybe have a team of only 2 or 3 people who manage all that. Okay, and you don't want 50 people in your office to be able to create pages as they see fit. Up to you. I don't really have a problem typically with regular end users, members of an organization, creating additional pages. I would have a problem if they attempted to create sites, because whenever you have people who are allowed to create sites, they have a tendency to nest sites, and whenever you end up with nesting, like sub sites, that should be a career changing event. So I would not allow them to have any level of permissions if I ended up seeing sub sites. So like here. So I gave them site assets, where you might put the site notebook that's automatically created for any collaborative site. It's a notebook that's inside of site assets. So I go ahead and say contribute, so that they can add and remove things as necessary. Site pages, again, contribute. The announcements, maybe we don't want anyone but the leadership to create those. So that's why I made that change right there. Calendar, I want everybody to be able to contribute. Now, note that I had read here, but contribute here. Depending on what you're doing with your calendar, you might want to change this to approve, because then they can approve leave requests or something. That's purely up to what you're doing with each of your applications. But all of the members of the leadership are also members of the organization. So you're going to have membership. You know, if John Smith is the boss, John Smith is also a member. So whatever the most permissive setting is the level that they're going to have. So it's not the most restrictive, which you might find in some systems. It's going to be the most permissive. So he has read here, contribute there. That means he's got contribute. Okay. But the reason why we're going to have this laid out is we want to be able to track at the site level what is the highest permission level, because that's going to affect what we do on the site. Okay. Then on the visitors, say I do have everyone else in the company coming in to the IT department. Okay. I might want them to be able to read some of the documents, but I might not want them to read anything in there. It depends. Okay. The images that get displayed, yes, they probably should be able to read those. The pages that get displayed, yes, I want them to read those. The site assets, they would need the site pages. Maybe I don't want them to see the announcements because that's for the team only. I don't want them to see that calendar because it's got people's leave information. I do want them to be able to see the links. I don't want them to be able to see the tasks that we've got going on. And there's one other very important library that's not listed here, and that is the style library. if you were to create a lot of different sites, it'll automatically come with the style library, and that style library ends up with a lot of CSS in it to affect the branding. So if you don't want people to be able to alter your branding, you give them read. If you want them to be able to edit the branding, they can have contribute. But if they have zero access whatsoever, all of your pages are going to end up looking funny. So everyone should have read to that library. Okay. Does anyone have a question thus far on the logic behind creating this?
Okay. No questions on my end, but the spreadsheet itself really helps to lay things out, especially if you're working with multiple team members. So this is solid info. Yeah.
Well, the other thing is, what if you're working with 50 different applications? It starts to get a little bit more complex trying to keep that in your head.
Exactly.
So from here, what I want you to think of is bonsai tree. Okay. So you need to look at the different groups here, and we're going to go into this permission. We're going to make some changes. So edit. So I'm going to click right here. That group to have add a base layer. Okay. You can or cannot add that checkbox to send out the email. It's up to you. So now it says here, I don't understand, but so it gives here by default read, full control, or edit, and I just hate that. So, what the heck? It won't let me do that for some reason. Okay, there must be a technical bug or something, but on the members, I would click to edit the user permissions, and I would drop it back down to contribute. So for whatever reason, I don't know why that's not functioning. This is a comm site that I'm going to show you something about here in a minute, but the for what reason it's not changing that. So whenever I say bonsai tree, what we're going to think of is that we want to have the most permissive level that they have in this workbook as their base level in the root of the site. The reason is because of things like this, underscore layouts. All of the application pages that come up and define how a page is supposed to be viewed are buried underneath here. If you change that permission level to either not exist at the site level or to be too low, bad things can happen. More often than not, I normally found this to be the problem with SharePoint Designer workflows, where they might be able to put in a work order ticket or something, but because they only had read rights on the rest of the site, someone came in and gave them contribute or contribute no delete on that work order list, and whenever they dropped something into that work order list, a workflow would kick off to send out notifications and move it to a working list and different things. Well, because they had these comments inside of, or logging statements inside of the workflow, it needed to write to the history list and to the workflow task list and things like that. Well, whenever you create that history list, by creating a workflow, it does not appear at all for end users. It's only invisible in the background. It's not a security thing. It's just, do we make it visible through the GUI? Well, they have to have access to that history list if they're going to write to it. The only way to have access to a brand new list or library is for it being the default setting on the site that they have some level of access. So I like to have all of my groups to typically have actually contribute at the root site. Okay. And I'm getting upset because it won't let me edit right there for some reason. But anyway, I would do that on the root site. Then I would go and I would look at all the site contents. And at that point, I would say settings. And if I saw somebody in the permissions for each of these lists and libraries that should not exist this way, I would stop inheriting permissions. Okay. And then I would come through here and I would say click, edit, drop them back down to contribute. Okay. And then I would drop the leadership, edit. I don't know. Okay, so it would look like this. And then you would go to the next item on your list. And you just continue to go into all these things, hit the permissions for that library, and make your changes as needed. So on this forms list, right, this was a forms template. So this is specifically for InfoPath forms, right, because they're still supported, just highly discouraged. So I don't want anyone creating InfoPath forms. I don't want anyone using them. So I don't even want to expose that this library exists. It came with the site. I'm going to stop inheriting permissions. I'm going to say okay, and I'm going to drop everybody. Oh, no, not that. Okay, now I, as a site collection administrator, know that this library exists. But even those people who are site administrators or site owners, right, they do not see that this library exists. So understand that full control is a wonderful permission level to have if you are a site owner. However, site collection owners or site collection administrators get even more permissions. And that will lead us into the next thing. But does everyone understand? Okay, you're going to go through and you're going to start breaking permissions on everything. And that's not a bad thing, as long as you've planned for it. Okay, if you've created sub sites, and on that 5th tier, you have broken inheritance on one folder. That's a career altering event. Okay, you should not you should not be working in SharePoint if that's something that you're doing. Okay, because there's no way to identify just from looking at the library that someone's changed permissions on this one document or this one folder, unless they write very, very large folder names to explain who has access. So it's just a pain whenever people do that. But I'm going to show you now. Site collection administrators have these extra functions right here, right? But they also get search. So if you're going to configure anything with search, you need to have site collection administrative rights. And if you're going to get that 2nd tier recycle bin, because there are 2 tiers on the recycle bin, you're going to need to have site collection admin rights. If you want to look at the security auditing, well, if it's in 365, you need some different privileges on the tenant now. But so some of these things aren't quite normal anymore. They would be kept in the tenant administration. In fact, I think it's because this is a team site that I can't see the permissions and stuff on here. If I go to this one, to sites, yeah, I can see users and permissions. So if we go into site collection administrators, you'll see where we can put those people, and they are just the ones who have God rights on the site collection. And they would have rights regardless if anyone else removes them, right? If you are in that site owners group or the site administrators group, you can create a brand new library and change the permissions on it and say only Scott has access to it. You've given him directly full control and no permissions to any group. You could do that. It would be just a very awful thing for you to do. That's a very bad way to manage your content. So I do not suggest ever directly giving permissions to a human. Everyone should be, all permissions should be handed to the different roles that you have created as the names of your groups. And then you should identify the people who fill those roles and put them into those groups. Okay? Just remember that. You don't give, Bob full control because you like Bob, right? Is he in that job? Okay, give him full control by putting him into that group of site administrators. So yeah, you're going to go through here and then you're going to trim the fat basically. You're going to go into those different lists and libraries and you're just going to go into the settings and you're going to trim the fat away, okay? So at this point, when you're going to create a new subsite, if you allow it, a lot of my clients, we don't even allow it. We turn off the ability. Just for those to do this. And you can say, I want a team site with no 365 group. I want a team site with classic experience. I want a project site. I want the old document center, record center, whatever. If you do SAP stuff, if you don't know what it is, don't touch it. But whenever you go to create a subsite, you can say use same permissions as the parent site or use unique permissions. Depends on the nature of the subsite. I personally have no love for subsites. Microsoft has been pushing for a flatter topology for a very long time. And the primary reason for having site collections is their security boundary. So if you're going to have different permissions on the site collection, where you, like, I would never put an entire organization under one site collection. There was a time in my career I would have, but I've learned, I've evolved, and I would suggest that you don't make a lot of those same mistakes that I made as a rookie. Because if you can create multiple site collections, and it works a whole lot better with 365 as well for being able to roll up content from other site collections. But if you create multiple site collections, you flatten that topology. That will help tremendously with your search results, okay? And it will prevent you from accidentally messing things up, okay? I worked for one client. The farm administrator had enough of people asking for requests for different things. So he's like, screw it, I'll give everybody read. He didn't think that would be a harmful thing to do, to give read access to everyone on everything. But he went to a setting where you could do that. And it exposed all of the investigation data on, for counterintelligence purposes, to everyone in the United States Army, to everyone in that organization. That was a career-altering event for that man. So just know that if the potential for leakage is highly damaging, you want to have that content in a different site collection. So the reason why, again, let's go through some key points here. The reason why we do this is we want to follow a basic security principle of the principle of least privilege, right? What is the least amount of privilege they need to do their job for this application? And every list or library is an application. SharePoint is a platform. So you got to think every single application. So you want to make certain that you don't give too much privilege on everything, because the nature of the work should not dictate so. We want to go through and use role-based access controls by creating groups that reflect the nature of their role, okay? We want to rename our permission groups to reflect the roles that we need, right? So there's no harm in changing the names. I will add one caveat to that though. If you go into a site that already exists and there's been a reorganization, and so it's no longer, ABC branch, it's DEF branch, right? If that happens to be the case and you go to rename a group, make certain you go and you check if you have any SharePoint Designer workflows running or any Power Automate flows running, because you might need to republish and change names. At least with SharePoint Designer, I know for a fact that if you were emailing or granting permissions to a particular group and that group no longer existed, your workflows would all break. So before you change the names, make certain that there are no existing workflows that you need to watch out for. Okay, be careful not to be redundant in your permission levels. This drives me absolutely nuts. So let's go into this right here. I have seen often something like this. If your site administrator is doing stuff like this, they need a class in SharePoint because that is pointless. As I said earlier, SharePoint gives you the most permissive security permission level that you've granted it. If you've already got full control, this is pointless. Okay, it just makes what you see here kind of ugly. So I highly suggest that you get rid of that. Okay. Do not. They tend to build. The only time you might find a point where you might want to have contribute and something else is contribute and approve. So if you've turned on features that allow you to do approval, you would want to have contribute and approve. So just FYI there. Okay, next, never allow the owner of a group to be another human, and never assign permissions directly to a human. Okay, very, very important, because you create single points of failure, and I guarantee that you'll end up with orphaned content. If I had libraries out here that I only owned, and not even site owners had them, and then I left the organization, I was fired or I quit or something, now no one other than site collection administrators even know that that data exists. Well, if you're in a 5,000 person organization, your site collection administrators probably won't know all 5,000 people, and they won't know when people come and go unless someone says, hey, we move these people from the groups and add these new people to the groups. So they might not know that I have a library where I've broken inheritance on a particular subfolder and granted myself permission. Well, if I leave the organization and my name gets ripped out, now it's just orphan content. And it gets really weird to try to find that orphan content. You have to be a site collection administrator to do so. So there's that problem. Now, access requests. This is a personal preference for all my sites. Okay, I don't allow access requests because they annoy me. I know the permission architecture that should exist. No one should be asking me for any elevated rights. If, however, you're going to have access requests, it will by default go to the owners group. If you have put the boss into here, guess who gets a whole lot of access requests? Another reason why you don't put the boss in to the owners group. But you could put an individual email down, or if there's some kind of a group email address, but it has to be an address, right? I can't say team site members. It won't render. It's not one of those auto rendering fields. Actually, you need to type in an email address. It doesn't ever render it into a user account. So I could have this go to a completely, off domain email address. I could have it go to my Gmail account or my Outlook account, right? So I don't really like that. I just turn off the access request. Personal preference. You can keep it on if you want to be bothered. The other thing that's important to see right here is allowing members to share the site and individual files and folders, allowing individual members to add other members. I hate what Microsoft did here. Personal preference, you might be joyous. My problem is that if I were to go to any actually, let's go pages, right? Home.aspx. And I'm like, oh, great. I just made this so pretty, right? Let me share it with some folks. Okay. If I share, right? If I go and I hit share and I'm like, hey, I stick my wife in here. Oh, that's because it's her personal account. There you go. Okay. So if you're just sharing, right? This is not social media. Okay. This isn't Facebook or Twitter. You're not just sending a link to something. You're breaking permissions on something. Okay. So oftentimes you'll find where someone has just updated a document, they want to notify someone in particular, so they go and they click on share and they send that link to somebody. Well, now we have changed the permissions on that one particular document. So now we want to bring in a whole nother team to work in the entire library with us. Well, if you bring in a whole nother team to work on that one particular library, that one folder or that one file that was shared is not going to be visible because inheritance was broken right there. So anything you add after the fact, they're not going to have any access to anything that was broken. So I absolutely hate this. It also gives them edit by default. And so that drives me nuts. So what I like to do is turn off I like to turn that off. So now, as a site owner, someone who's educated and trained and understands what sharing really does, I unclick this. So now, as a member, if you were to go ahead and share particular content, right? If you want to share this, you're not going to be able to. You're going to end up with people going, oh, well, let me just copy and send it out. Far safer, because you don't want people breaking the permission inheritance on things, especially like, oh, your home page. Bad things happen. And then, yeah, making certain that your permission groups are visible by everybody. That's important. That hits all of my, oh, that was everything on my checklist, but there was something else because someone had mentioned it before, and that's why I created this demo com site, right? So for the sake of argument, I'm going to say that this is a division level site, and I'm going to say that this Teams site was a branch level site, right? Divisions are bigger than branches. I want to have two different site collections, but I want to have some of that roll-up functionality. And I want to have permissions get passed along. Well, we can create hub sites. So if I were to make this a hub site, I would have to go into here, go into right here, and I'm going to so stupid here. Register as hub site. So I'm going to say that this com site can be, and people who could associate subsites with this, right? You're going to have to typically you would put in a group name or something, but so, so I'm just going to say me. So the site is now registered as a hub site. So on the team site now, if I go into site information, I can click and I can add it to the subset or to this hub site. So now I'm going to see okay. So you're going to see this extra navigation that was added because of the hub site. Okay. And then the rest of the team site stuff that was normally there. Okay. Whenever you have anyway, whenever you have the extra thing right here, we haven't set the permissions yet. Okay, back on the hub site, we want to go to site permissions and you're gonna have to forgive me. I don't remember off the top of my head where the darn toggle switch is, but the hub site needs to show that thanks here. I think it's right here where it's spinning. Maybe because it's so new as a hub site, it's not one to come up. But I believe this is where the toggle switch is to enable the permission groups here to be passed down. So you'd enable the toggle here, and then on the demo site as well, then you'd have to privacy settings, change that around for the hub site so that anyone in the organization, and that enables the visitors group to get passed down through that. So there you go. So yeah, that is everything that I wanted to cover. Does anyone have any particular questions that they would like to ask? I'd say in general, you definitely want to work within security boundaries of the site collections and not try to have something too complex. Microsoft wanted to go to that flatter topology. So I think that you really need to keep that in mind with having more simple permissions, as far as instead of having 50 different permission groups available on a particular site collection. You still want to leave it to like maybe a dozen at most, and that's because you have, you know, subordinate offices where you have identified key roles or something. But you want to keep the number of groups that you're working with much, much smaller. You'll have plenty of permission breaks as necessary, but you don't want to have such a large population in every site collection to worry about. The potential risk for exposing sensitive data is just too high. So anyone who wants to chime in with any questions, please go ahead right now and do so.
Hey, Scott, you unmute. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, on that comment about having multiple site collections instead of everything being under one. If there is a security breach and you have everything under one site collection, what happens?
That tends to be dependent upon the organization, right? I remember the first time I had to deal with a real breach on a site. This was back with MOS 2007. I had different ones in my SAN set up for different databases. I had different databases for every site collection. And because of that, I had to wipe an entire one out of my SAN because of the nature of the classified content that had made its way into that site collection. So that was an actual spill of classified content. There was some SAP content, special access program stuff that should have never made its way onto any SharePoint site. Should have never been on that network, but it was, and I had to actually wipe part of the SAM. Well, since this is SharePoint Online, I can't just wipe that kind of stuff. But you know, the amount of, basically, you'd have to follow whatever is in policy. That means I hope to God there's a policy in place, but understand that whenever you delete anything, say there was a leak, right, of classified leak, you would have to delete the content, go into the recycle bin, delete the content, go into the second tier recycle bin, delete the content, and then depending upon like retention policies and stuff you've had in place behind the scenes, you might have additional stuff at the tenant level to wipe things out. Because of FedRAMP and whatnot, if you were working GovCloud, it'd be different. If this is, say, just the company's internal financials and you're on commercial 365, you accidentally find out, oh my God, we've had this exposed to everybody for the last month. When you fix the permission break, you fire the person who did it, especially if it was intentional, and you need to go scrub the security audit logs in the Security and Compliance Center, which is, I think, now being renamed the Defender, Microsoft.com, but you can get to all the admin centers, and you'll go into the security stuff, and then you have to start going through all the audit logs to find out who accessed what and when. So there should be policies in place to say this is how we as a business will handle this. From a technical aspect, since it's 365, you're just going to delete, you know, if there's exposure of something that shouldn't have existed, you're just going to delete, go to the recycle bin, delete, go to the second tier recycle bin and delete.
How do you find the second recycle bin?
If you are a site collection admin, right, that's how you're going to find it. First stage recycle bin on new team sites is right here on the front page. So that's first level, right? If I worked in a document library and I deleted something, I'm going to find it right here on the recycle bin. Awesome. Okay. If you're in that recycle bin and you are a site collection admin, guess what? You've got a link to it right here. Second stage recycle bin. So that's right here at the bottom. And else?
So I want to follow up on that question and kind of rephrase it with some context. If you have a company that is working with Office 365 and for some reason has decided that you should have one site collection for everything across the company, how could you convince the powers that be that that is a not so good idea?
Well, aside from getting them to be drug tested, the main thing that you can always point out is if you are using Microsoft Teams, you already have additional site collections. Every team gets its brand new, all to its own site collection. So typically what I would find in a lot of organizations and what I've recommended with my current client is that branch and team level organizational sites are all created as teams in Microsoft Teams. And we are rolling those up underneath hub sites, which are based on the divisions. And so that's just how we're working with it. So we're using the team sites as site collections, and then we're having the divisions have their own site collections as well. Every organization gets its own site collection at every tier, because the security is kind of necessary, especially if you're in an organization that does reorganizations often, like the government, right? Because they want that bullet on their evaluation that says they have streamlined business functions, and that's always done by reorg. So every time there's a new person in charge, they reorg. So if I were to reorg and I got a new name, well, the way that you would break things and move things around if you had one site collection is extremely ugly. Okay. But if I had a separate site collection for all these smaller offices, all I need to do is go into the admin center, come in here, and I can edit the name and show you real quick. If it pops up, there we go. Right? And I can even edit the URL, which was, oh, I'm sorry, because that's a hub site, I can't. Or because it's a hub site. But let me go to the Teams. So this one, I can edit the address. So it's a demo team site. I'm going to say reorg site. It'll see if the address is available, and then it's there. Okay, so whenever there's a reorganization, this is absolutely essential. Right? If whenever I was at DISA, we had the Office of Knowledge Management underneath the CIO. We were able to convince them that, hey, this is such an important function. They wanted to move it underneath the Chief of Staff. So in order to move it to the Chief of Staff, it was under the CIO originally, and it was part of the CIO's site collection. So we had to migrate all that content manually from one site collection to another. It was a pain. But if you're just doing different site collections for every office, all I really need to do is update my navigation. I don't have to update permission structures. I don't need to update all kinds of ugliness. I just need to update the navigation and the names. There are so many bad reasons to limit things to a single site collection. Like, if anyone is thinking to do just a single site collection, the last version of SharePoint they probably used was 2007, and they never had to do it repeated for other customers. And especially if someone's advertising themselves as a SharePoint expert, yeah, let me know their name, and I'll advertise all over Twitter. Don't hire this person.
You got a mean streak there, dude.
I know, I can be an ass. Hey, I whenever I was in the Army a long time ago, I had a lieutenant colonel who decided he had too much rank to check his own oil, and he blew up the engine in his car. And I personally presented him with the bill. And I said, "This is your statement of charges, sir. You had too much rank to be that irresponsible." He got so furious. He took me before the general. And the general was like, "Colonel, you are an ass." And he chewed him a new one right in front of me. And it was wonderful. Because, you know, I just don't like, I don't know. Sometimes when things aren't right, I just like to set them straight. I don't care if that messes up my own career. No. Anyway, other thoughts, questions, concerns about how we break that down? Because I'll tell you, in my workbook here, that permissions map is one thing. I don't have it in this one. I had a full kind of a site hierarchy tab in my other workbook. I need to get the updated one I have out on the website so that people can take a look. But that's why one of the options here is site. Website. Yeah. So that you could have, you know, the different root sites listed or something. Because I'm not completely opposed to having a couple subsites. It just really depends if it's if there's a technological reason for it, right? Because far too often I'd seen people create subsites where all they wanted was a single page. And so I'd find a site with 34 subsites because they really had 34 pages of content, static content. But every time you create a new site, you get a new calendar, a new discussion group, a new, you know, all these different things that come automatically. And it was pointless. It was not needed. And all they needed was a new page. So I don't like subsites if they're not necessary. It's also harder to aggregate data and stuff. If I can put things in at the same site, you know, it's useful. If I want data between this team and this team and this team, 3 different teams, and I want to aggregate that content and their separate site collections, that tends to be why a lot of people wanted to have that single site collection thing. But if you're using hub sites, all that content rolls up because of the hub site connections. So if you if you go into any hub site and then you scroll. So any of these news items for any of the sites that are underneath the hub site, it would come up in here, right? And so I'm going to add new web part, and I'm going to look at, say, highlighted content. It's dynamically roll up documents, pages, or other content, right? So if I had content in all of these different site collections, it would roll up, okay? I would just click, edit, and I can say custom query or, you know, particular filter. The source can be this site collection or other things, right? All sites. And you can say, I want all documents or all everything or all contacts or all tasks, right? So if you had project management thing going on. You're gonna have different project sites, site collections, one PMO hub site, and you could have all of that content roll upward. But you don't want necessarily every single person who is a member of this project to be able to see the content in the other projects. And the way that all of that roll-up data works is if you don't have permissions in the first place, you never see it. So I don't like the excuse that well, for roll-up purposes we need one site collection. That's just wrong. You need that security boundary in place. That is the most important thing. You know, if we had to manually copy and paste data to do a roll-up, that is far less work than what you have to face if you spill content. If you have, you know, say you're like one of my old companies and you had external companies, you know, as your subcontractors working with you on a project, or you doing business development, what's the risk level that you're willing to take of exposing financials or any of that stuff to your subs, you know, when they shouldn't have any access? If you gave them access to the entire site collection by bringing them in, the potential risk that someone put everyone instead of everyone but external users in is just too high. Like that's crazy. It is really, really crazy. Anyway, I'll get off that soapbox on this.
Okay. Thank you, Scott, for delivering a session. It's one of these things where it's if permissions, we often think about sites and tenants, but permissions, especially based on what you shared, is something that you should start with first and build the right foundation. Otherwise, it can completely screw up what you have in your environment. So I know for a fact that a lot of people don't factor in permissions or don't know how to. So with the workbook and the examples you shared, they can view this recording and at least have a place to start and reach out to you if you know, they want to take it a step further.
Yep, I'm gonna find that more updated version of my workbook that I use, and I will post a link to it inside of the meetup, so that people can get access to it.
Excellent. All right. On behalf of Scott, thank you for tuning in to this meeting. Join us next month, third Thursday in September, for our next virtual meeting. Have a good evening.
You too. Ciao.